We're also joined tonight by my friend from Illinois, a distinguished member of the House Ways and Means Committee, Darin, LaHood, who comes from America's heartland of agriculture and can speak to the issue of how do we achieve this outcome that we want, more open markets, fair and reciprocal trade, but how do we do that in a way that minimizes the impact on American consumers and our agricultural producers? And I yield time to my friend from Illinois.
Well, I want to thank my colleague, Congressman French Hill, for organizing tonight's special order on trade, and I will associate my thoughts tonight with the comments made by Congressman Davidson and also with Congressman French Hill. And I would just start off and say it's imperative that we as members of Congress come together to stress to the President and his administration the importance of free trade. You know, when I look back over the last year and a half of this administration, I applaud the President and his leadership in working with us to roll back regulation, have reasonable regulation in place, and also once-in-a-lifetime tax reform that he was able to get passed along with this Congress. Two accomplishments that have jump-started our stagnant economy, and we are seeing the results. However, I think we do ourselves a real disservice to the work that we have already done on this economy by engaging in a trade war. I think we go backwards in terms of the economic progress that we are making to get in a long-term trade war. And I got to tell you, Mr. Davidson referenced it a little bit, it's frustrating and disappointing to see several staff members with the President that are unelected and unconfirmed that are trade protectionists. And they have the ear of the President when it comes to implementing trade policy, and that is, again, frustrating. And these protectionists are failing to take the time to recognize and understand the long-term costs of the recent tariff actions and our current position as it comes to renegotiating NAFTA and other trade agreements on our economy. And many times before, when I think back at the election, you know, our president wasn't elected by people on the East Coast or the West Coast. It was people in the Midwest, people from rural America, people from the South that helped elect him. And unfortunately, these are the folks that are left the worst off by these trade policies that are being put in place currently by the administration. And as we move forward in this Congress, we need to carefully examine how much authority the legislative branch has ceded over time to the executive branch. And I credit my colleague Warren Davidson for introducing a piece of legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of that would help take back a little of that authority under our Constitution, to have more input from Congress on that. And we need to talk more about that. Managing our trade policies to determine how best to restore our constitutional authority. Our other colleague, Congressman Gallagher of Wisconsin, has introduced a piece of legislation that also does the same thing. We have no choice or alternative with the current world that we live in. We live in a globalized world with supply chains set and marketplaces and customers continuing to grow, but we need to be engaged. And given that 95% of the world's customers live outside of the United States, we tend to forget that we represent about 4.5% of the world's population. There's no doubt we produce the best goods, we produce the best products, we have the best workers, but you got to have markets. You got to have customers around the world for those products to go to support free and fair trade. I think about Illinois. Illinois is the 6th largest state in the country. Ag is the #1 industry in the state of Illinois. It's the #1 industry in my district. When I think about Illinois, for example, global trade supports over 1,700,000 jobs in Illinois. Ensuring that our manufacturers and farmers have access to markets around the world to sell their goods is vital to their ability to remain competitive and our economic success. The district that I represent, Illinois' 18th, spans central and central Illinois. We are proud to be home to some of the world's most respected manufacturers, including companies like John Deere, Caterpillar, CNH. We're also home to some of the world's most fertile farmland. We have the 8th largest district in the country in terms of corn and soybean production in the country. About 40% of the corn and soybeans grown in my district go somewhere else around the world. They get put on barges on the Illinois-Mississippi River, go down that river through New Orleans, through the Gulf, through the new Panama Canal, and go anywhere around the world. But when you put up tariffs and barriers, you restrict those farmers from getting their goods all across the world. Unfortunately, these days, manufacturing and agriculture communities like mine across the country face uncertainty and dark days ahead. That's because of our current trade policy. While I applaud the President's intent to go after bad actors in the global marketplace, his approach and the resulting retaliation has put our American workers and products in jeopardy with no end in sight. The administration's reckless and frequent use of tariffs, some premised on national security, which I think is a fallacy, threatened to spark an all-out trade war in this country and around the world. We have already seen retaliation on American-made products from some of our closest allies like Canada, Mexico, and the EU. In addition, China, which consumes a third of the world's soybeans, has also followed suit. In Illinois, total state exports threatened by new tariffs has reached over 3,800,000. Instead of tariffs, which are simply taxes passed on to consumers, our approach to address unfair trading practices should be targeted to minimize collateral damage and should include specific and clear end goals, which we have not seen. Bottom line, we must pursue targeted trade enforcement policies that minimize harm to American farmers, our rural communities, and our manufacturers. We know that our agriculture industry is typically first and hardest hit by any trade retaliation. To make things worse, our farmers are already at a disadvantage compared to other foreign competitors, given the lack of free trade agreements that the U.S. has compared to other countries, especially in the Asian markets. It was referenced earlier, TPP, which is, of course, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is going on without us. And I look back at this administration, there was a lot of talk when they came in about bilateral trade agreements. Well, we're 19 months into this administration, we don't have one. Not one bilateral trade agreement. A lot of talk about putting those in place. And part of the reason we haven't had that is they've run from us because of our position and what we've asked for in those bilateral trade agreements. The loss of marketplace due to tariffs will be extremely hard to regain and may not be possible to regain at all. The administration's go-at-it-alone approach is clearly not as effective as with working with our allies to negotiate a solution to global oversupply and technology theft perpetrated by countries like China. And there is no doubt they have done that. The forced technology transfers, the stealing of our technology should be addressed. But there are better ways to do that in a strategic and a precise way, partnering with our allies to do that. But we can't do that going at it alone, and we can't do it premised on national security. Lastly, let me just say that we've heard a lot about surpluses. We've heard a lot about trade deficit. And it seems like the administration is fixated on trade deficits. So I will tell you, in agriculture, we have a trade surplus with every country in the world. And you think about the collateral damage that's going to be done to those farmers and those ag products by engaging in a trade war. And we do need to address the trade deficit, but it's a complicated, nuanced issue that we ought to address. And there's lots of things to do that. There's a lot of things that we can do to change that instead of the path we're headed down right now. At the end of the day, our farmers want trade, not aid. In a free market system, it shouldn't be based on subsidies or aid. And so we need to, again, continue to work with this administration on our proper oversight, taking back some of our constitutional authority to make sure that we are getting the message across that we need to have free and open trade that's going to benefit our farmers, our manufacturers, and working people all across.